Allen was born and raised in Frankfort and graduated from Frankfort High School in 1978. He attended college at, and I'm going to butcher this, Valparaiso University in Indiana. During the summer, he worked for the family business on various marine construction projects on the Great Lakes. After receiving a business degree with 3 years of civil engineering in 1983, he worked for the Scherer Electric Company out of Indianapolis, Giffels Associates Architecture firm in Southfield, Michigan, and Morrison-Knudsen Company construction firm out of Boise, Idaho. In 1989, he returned to the family business and worked as a superintendent for the next 3 years. He returned to the home office in Frankfort in 1993 and became vice president in 1995 after the passing of his father, Karl, in December of 1994. He left the family business in September of 2002 and has spent the last 23 years in the banking industry. His wife, Jean, is a comptroller for flooring covering brokers out of Traverse City. He also has a stepdaughter named Jamie and a stepson named Aaron. Aaron, who has worked for Luedtke Engineering for 10 years as a project superintendent until January of 23 when the business closed. He also has another stepdaughter named Christina and have 3 grandchildren. Currently, Allen is the president of the Willoughby Rotary Foundation and chair of the Frankfort Rotary Club's annual Kurt Luedtke Memorial Golf Outing fundraiser event that has raised $80,000 in the past 4 years to support the scholarship program for graduating seniors at both Benzie County Central Schools to attend college. He's also a board member of the Frankfort, Alberta Education Foundation. So please join me in welcoming Allen as he presents 95 years of Luedtke Engineering. Please.
Before I start my program, I'd like to tell a story. I was with my 5-year-old grandson, Sam Mallory, at Crystal Mountain. And as we got in line for the chairlift, we ended up getting on the lift with another skier. At the time, I didn't know who the skier was, but later found out he was Lou Battori. He was 98 years old, and he was the oldest skier ever at Crystal Mountain. While we were riding up the chairlift, Lou looked down at my grandson, Sam, and asked him, "How long have you been skiing?" My grandson looked up at him and said, "A long time." 95 years of the Luedtke Engineering Company, 1930 to 2025. That's a long time. 28 years ago, Uncle Eric gave a program at the Betsy Shore District's Library in Frankfort in 1997. I'm going to start my presentation reading the notes from that program. 67 years of the Luedtke Engineering Company. My father, Elroy R. Luedtke, the founder of the Luedtke Engineering Company, was born on March 27, 1901, and raised in Reedsville, Wisconsin, near Manitowoc, Wisconsin. After graduating from high school, he spent a year working in an aluminum manufacturing company in Manitowoc, Wisconsin. On the weekends, he went home, but the train was always late Monday, bringing him back to Manitowoc. Since he was always late on Mondays, they called him the Duke of Reedsville. The nickname Duke stuck with him for the rest of his life. In 1920, Duke entered the University of Wisconsin Engineering School and graduated in 1923. He started his career working for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He married Lucille T. Luedtke in July of 1925. He worked for several private contractors, and in 1928, he took a job as a superintendent for the Gray Lake Construction Company of Green Bay, Wisconsin, building the South Breakwater at Frankfort, Michigan. On April 1st, 1930, he started his own business and celebrated 10 days later with the arrival of his first son, Karl. The original stockholders were E.R. Luedtke, 25 shares, Lucille Luedtke, 2 shares, Dr. Fred Thacker, 5 shares, and in 1950, the company purchased Dr. Thacker's shares. His first employees were Nelson Holtry, who became a diver, foreman, and superintendent. Some of the key employees in the 1930s and early 1940s were Nels Holtry, Joe May, Stanley Lanswitz, Joe Lanswitz, Mike Bauer, and Signe Nielsen. Next picture. In 1931, the company was awarded a contract for $135,000 for the construction of a breakwater at Waukegan, Illinois for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Chicago District. This was job number 4. This was the first steel sheet piling breakwater built in the world. Duke decided to set and drive steel sheet piles in panels instead of one pile at a time. This simple idea resulted in a profit of $25,000 after paying for the equipment he purchased. The wage rates on the jobs varied from 60 cents an hour, 60 cents to 80 cents per hour. Here's a picture of my grandfather. That's Duke, third from left with a hat, and he's directing the construction of the first steel sheet piling break wall in the world. And that picture is dated September 25th, 1931. He was 30 years old at the time. Next picture. This is a newspaper article I was given to me by my mother, Sue. It says, Frankfort to be home of engineering company. E.R. Luedtke just completed a new type of structure. One of the best bits of news to break in some time is the fact that Frankfort is to be the home of the Luedtke Engineering Company. E.R. Luedtke, who heads this organization, came here with a company which erected the south arm of the breakwater. After severing connections with this company, Mr. Luedtke organized the firm which bears his name. Besides several smaller jobs, the company has just completed a piece of water engineering in Waukegan, Illinois, which is an innovation in this line of work, which is attracting a great deal of attention from engineers all over the country. The docks formerly occupied by the Anderson Fishing Company have been leased by Mr. Luedtke, and he's fitting up an office there. During the winter, he's planning to build a scow, dimensions of which are 32 by 64. A business such as this is a credit to any place, and Frankfort should be greatly pleased that Mr. Luedtke has seen fit to establish this as the seat of his company's activities. One of the most important decisions made during the 1930s was made just prior to the closing of the banks. We were banking with 3 local banks. A native of Frankfort who was working as a banker returned to work on the family farm. He informed Dad that the banks were in trouble. Shortly after, our bonding company asked Dad where he banked and made the statement, the Marshall Isley Bank in Milwaukee is an excellent bank. Dad figured the bonding company was telling him something, so Dad removed his money from the local banks and deposited in the Marshall Isley Bank. When Roosevelt closed the banks, the local banks did not reopen. The Marshall Isley Bank closed for one day and then reopened. This decision saved the company. Our major job in 1932 was rebuilding the Algoma, Wisconsin breakwater for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. This was job number 7. We were not the low bidder on this job, but obtained the job on a subcontract. This was the only job bid that year. In 1933, we built the Manistee, Michigan breakwater for the U.S. Corps of Engineers. This was job number 14. The picture here is dated June 6, 1933, in the Manistee South breakwater. Next picture is the work on the Manistee breakwater. It's June 6, 1933. If you look over to the right, you can see 3 workers. I believe that's Stanley Lanswitz that my uncle mentioned in his key employees. And that's the Tug General on the dock parked there. The next picture shows the Manistee breakwater work. There's a scow, riprap concrete, and a mixer plant. And this picture was dated July 1, 1933. Then the final picture is when the job was completed on August 1st, 1933. An important decision was made by the Ann Arbor Railroad to have us do their dock repair work in Frankfort, Michigan. This work had previously been done by McMullen and Pitts of Manitowoc, Wisconsin. In 1934, we had 2 contracts with the U.S. Lighthouse Department building the Spectacle Reef and the Minneapolis Shoal lighthouses. This was job number 24 and 25. The company had a total profit of $9,196.25 for the years of 1932 to 1934. This is a picture showing the repairs to the Spectacle Reef Lighthouse located in Lake Huron. September 1934. And this is the picture of what the lighthouse looks today. The other job Eric mentioned was the Minneapolis Shoals Light Station 1934. This was job number 25. This was located in Lake Michigan, and it's the light station entrance to Green Bay. There's another picture of the project. It shows the crane, the clamshell bucket, a barge filled with stone, and this is pictures dated June 27, 1935. The next picture is working his way up, pushing oakum and a ceiling material into the cross of a wood scow. It's young Karl Luedtke. Tries to help his dad with a business. He was 5 years old at the time. The picture on the right is looking into the future. Karl Luedtke peers off the bow of the tug Karl as we're dreaming of the future. This was May 29th, 1935. In 1935, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was taking bids on the construction of a breakwater at Kewanee, Wisconsin. This was job number 27. The Gillen Company of Milwaukee, Wisconsin was the main competitor on this job. Mr. Gillen told the vice president what to bid and left on a trip to Scotland. When the vice president found out we were bidding, he tried to talk Duke out of bidding since he had no authority to cut his bid. Luckily, Luedtke Engineering was a successful bidder at $352,608. The wage rates were from 85 cents to $1.10 per hour. Here's a picture of the tug Karl towing the Derrickboat into the harbor entrance, along with a steel workboat designed by my grandfather and built by the workers. This picture was August 1937. This picture would later appear on the company business cards and letterhead. This is another picture of the Kewanee breakwater. I counted 40 workers in this picture. Duke is far left standing, and next to him is Nels Holtry. That'd be right. It's my grandfather, and there's Nels Holtry. I was told that this was when the men were made of I was told that this was when the men were made of steel and the boats were made of wood. And then this is a final picture of the Kewanee breakwater in July 1937. We had earned a profit of $28,000. Here's a picture of after the Kewanee contract enabled us to purchase our first large crane, a 40-ton Orton crane. They're pictured there placing stone riprap along the breakwater. The work turned out to be profitable, enabled Duke to build his home at 10 Nipissing Street. This was job number 30. Built by workers during the winter months, all the stone and steel foundation work on the house. A lot of the materials were used left over from previous construction projects. Job number 57 in 1940, we built our first water intake pipeline for Muskegon Heights, Michigan. In the years of 1939 through 1941, there was a change in our market. The Michigan Highway Department began building new car ferry docks in St. Ignace and Mackinac City. Our main project was placing stone on the causeway, which is now the approach to the Mackinac Bridge on the St. Ignace side. This was job number 77. It was part of the causeway in 1941. Here's another picture of the Mackinac Bridge causeway. This was an early picture of the Mackinac Bridge construction. The causeway was used as a staging area. You can see some of the equipment being placed there for the bridge. Work was halted during World War II, but when the bridge was finally built in the 1950s, the causeway ended up saving the Mackinac Bridge Authority a great deal of money. During the war years, the company had difficulty finding work. The net worth of the company declined. In 1941, we had a contract with Latham Smith Company in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, to build a shipyard. Latham Smith, who didn't have any money, got a contract with the Navy to build ships and gave the contract to Luedtke Engineering to build the docks. The Navy did not give Latham Smith any money, and we had no money we had to borrow money to finance this work. The situation became desperate since we couldn't stop work and we didn't have the money to continue. The Navy at the time, at the last minute, sent script. Needless to say, the local banks were not interested in script. We were finally able to find a bank in Chicago which redeemed the script. The lesson learned, which Dad impressed upon us, that you should always think ahead and figure out what can go wrong. 1943, this was job 104. It was for the U.S. Coast Guard, shore protection, Point Betsy Lighthouse. And you can see in the picture, there's some of the steel sheet piling right over here getting ready for the project on the beach before installation. And that's the picture of Point Betsy today, one of the most famous landmarks in Benzie County. The next picture is Mackinac Island. This is the Round Island Passage Lighthouse, job number 149 for the U.S. Coast Guard, 1946. They're working on the base of the lighthouse. And this is the picture of the Round Island Passage Lighthouse today. Job number 162, 1947, Michigan Highway Department, Charlevoix Bridge. Luedtke erected the superstructure and the building the detour roadway. And this is a picture of the Charlevoix Bridge today. This is a picture, 1947, the Luedtke family, the first and second generation. The family picture at 10 Nipissing. It was their home in the living room. You've got Duke, Lucille, Eric, Karl, and Gretchen. After the war, the economy got better, but my father suffered his first heart attack. He turned to his old roommate, Mike Bauer, for help. Mike became our general superintendent and remained until retiring at 76 years old. In 1949, we built a 36-inch diameter water intake pipeline for Benton Harbor, Michigan, job number 190. The line was 3,876 feet long and ended in an area where the river current had scoured out a hole. When we put the intake in the hole, the divers were in chest-high sewage. Needless to say, an adjustment was made. In 1950, job number 204, we received a contract from Wisconsin Power and Light to build a water intake line at Sheboygan, Wisconsin. This job moved us into the market with the private utilities. At that time, the power companies required their company to sign with the unions. My father, Karl, would spend the next 40 years negotiating contracts with all of the unions. I think we got St. Mary's, one before that maybe. Okay. The St. Mary's River, this was one of their first dredging projects that was up in Middle Nebish Channel in 1953, job 241. The picture shows the dredge material and the wooden crib built on the deck of the Derrickboat. Shows where all the dredge material is. The 1950s were a period of steady growth. Karl Luedtke began working for the company in 1955 after graduating from the University of Wisconsin Engineering School, and Eric Luedtke began in 1957 after graduating from the University of Wisconsin. During the late 1950s and early 1960s, the family was busy producing the next generation of Luedtkes. In 1960, job 307, I think our next slide, we were awarded a contract by the Midwest Steel to build a water intake line. I'm sorry, that's not right. The Benton Harbor. And this was a very profitable, and Dad remodeled the office and warehouse addition, which he always wanted to do. That was job number 306. Now we're into. The 1960s were very profitable, and our major project was the construction of two 14-foot diameter pipelines for the Wisconsin-Michigan Power Company at Kewanee, Wisconsin, which enabled us to build the Derrickboat 16. This was job 360. The power plant was located at a distance of 12 miles south of Kewanee, Wisconsin Harbor. Now I'd like to read from an article that was in the Betsy Current newspaper article. The site location was many miles from a safe harbor, which would leave the Luedtke workers, tugs, and equipment exposed to the sudden dangers of Lake Michigan weather. To overcome this formidable threat, Luedtke purchased 4 aged vessels to intentionally sink in a configuration so as to provide a temporary safe harbor at the work site. The steamships Tampico, Adrian Iselin, Alfred Krupp, and Saskatoon were purchased and towed to the work site. The brilliant plan had at its risk, though, primary of which was the ships could break apart while sitting on the lake bottom, making for a costly recovery when the job was finished. The 4 ships were sunk according to plan, creating a horseshoe-shaped harbor, protecting the job site. Moreover, the Krupp was still in good condition with a functioning power plant and cabins that it proved valuable accommodations for the Luedtke workers and was lit up like a Christmas tree at night, according to former employees. When the work was completed in 1973, the 4 ships were raised without incident. Despite 5 years having passed, the Krupp provided a shelter for the workers at 2 subsequent job sites. The Saskatoon was towed to Kewanee, Wisconsin and scrapped. But Luedtke Engineering had another plan for the Tampico and the Adrian Iselin. The ships were towed back to Frankfort, brought up the newly dredged channel, and sunk perpendicular to the shore at the former municipal landfill site, thus creating 2 much-needed 250-foot steel docks for the company's fleet. Remember, this was a marshland, so building a set of docks from scratch would have been costly and difficult. Today, over 50 years later, these 2 ships, which have seen such long, well-traveled and storied lives, rest their bones in Betsy Lake, which is now known as the Luedtke Boneyard. And this is the picture of the Luedtke Boneyard. It's got the tug Allen tied up next to the hull of the Tampico, which serves as a dock. Now I'd like to talk about the building of the Derrickboat 16. I was able to get a transcript from my father, Karl Luedtke, and he had taken a cassette tape and recorded it, and I was able to write down the information that he provided. It starts out as this: the construction of the Derrickboat 16 had started in 1965. We developed plans for a new derrickboat in which we would buy a Clyde diesel electric crane. Our first size and design was complete. We had designed the scow and priced out cranes from Clyde Irons and Clyde Worley. This was a major expansion for us. After we had the design of the scow done, I could remember I was really upset because Dad decided the crane we were looking at wasn't big enough and we should get a bigger crane. This meant we had a complete redesign of the scow and part of the scow that had already been built. Because we decided on a bigger crane, it meant we had to design the end of the scow that had not been built deeper. Of course, it meant all the work I had done up to that date had to be redone and involved a lot of work. I can remember both Mike Bauer and myself looking at the Clyde Model 28 crane that we had decided to buy, and I thought, why would we ever need a crane that big? Well, of course, as things turned out, we certainly did need a crane that big. My dad's reaction in changing the size of the crane was certainly right. The construction of the Derrickboat 16 was something, of course, I always wanted to do, and it was aggressive and wanted to expand in favor of it. It certainly surprised me that my father was willing to go ahead with the project. It meant that we'd had to go back into debt and borrow money. The eventual budget for the crane was $600,000 for the crane and the scow. We had about $300,000 cash available, which meant we had to borrow $300,000. For the last 10 years, the Luedtke Engineering Company had been able to operate without any debt. In other words, even for operating funds during the year, we had not had to borrow any money at all. We had sufficient cash to meet our operating needs, and this to me was an amazing decision by my father, who was 66 years old and would be willing to go back into debt. Also, it was a major expansion of our ability. If you look at the fact that we had 2 cranes that each swung about 3.5 cubic yard bucket, that meant we had a total bucket capacity of 7 cubic yards. And adding this new crane that was going to have a 8 cubic yard bucket capacity, that meant we were doubling our bucket capacity, and in essence, doubling our ability to work. This was a tremendous expansion. You look back from a historical point of view and say, well, we'll build another derrickboat. But we did at the time was double the digging capacity of the Luedtke Engineering Company. This was a huge expansion. It wasn't the case of building another derrickboat. It was doubling the size of the company. Since we only had 2 tugs, it meant we were going to have to get another tug and more dump scows. It was a big step, a giant step. I'll never forget the vice president of sales for Clyde Iron Works came to the Frankfort to talk to us about the crane and to sell us a crane. Prior to the meeting, Eric, Dad, and myself sat down and we agreed that we were not going to make a commitment to buy the crane at that time. We had been for over a year building this scow, of course. We would order the steel. As we got part of the scow built, we would order more steel and build some more of the scow on our dock here in Frankfort. In this way, we controlled the rate of investment. At any time we wanted to stop the investment, we could, but once we ordered the crane, As I remember, they wanted about 25% down with the order plus progress payments. And that meant that the crane was going to come in about 9 months later. We were going to have the scow built. We were going to have to buy the buckets and the deck equipment, and we were committed. We also had to borrow the money. We were committing ourselves to putting a piece of equipment to work that was a major, major decision. Of all the decisions we made in the last 30 years, this was the largest decision. So it was most surprising when we had the meeting with Clyde that all of a sudden Dad said, we'll buy it. It might be a decision Eric or myself, being younger, might not do, but all of a sudden Dad said, we'll buy it. And now, and it really shocked me at that time. The decision to go forward was made by Grandpa Luedtke, or Duke Luedtke. I call him Dad, but people listening to this may be calling him Grandpa. But Duke Luedtke made the decision, and he never lived to see the crane. Now we'd like to go into a video that we have that my father took while the building of the Derrickboat 16. And that video was narrated by Tom Sokovy. I take a few minutes to pull up the video.
The video of the launching of Derrickboat 16 took place from December of 1968 to March of 1969. The actual work began in October of 1966. Here you have a view of the barge setting on round piles in front of Luedtke's office. There's a view of the slide timbers and the carriage assembly that was used to support the 16. All the wedges were driven in to cause a load transfer from the round timber piles to the carriage assembly. Here you see a fellow breaking his back as usual for the company. There's a view of the top of Derrickboat 16. The launch date was set for December 21st at 2 in the afternoon. Much of the town of Frankfort showed up for the launching. There's a view of Derrickboat 10 with Crane 3. Crane 3 did most of the erection and work on the Derrickboat 16. There's another view of the slide timbers. Two of those did break on launching. Some of the men that worked on this project included Nels Holtry, Dallas Smith, Bob Hollenbeck, Dick Wallaker, Doug Johnson, Howard Johnson, Jim Ryder, Bill Frary, Greg Lamerson, and Tom Zad Colvin. As the men were cutting off the round piles supporting the 16, there was a lot of concern about what would happen if the barge came down. I remember Nels Holtry calmly going underneath the scow, standing with the men cutting off the round piles, lighting up his Camel cigarette, and saying, if it comes down, we'll all die. Needless to say, the launch went perfect. It was, however, about a half hour late. And if you know Karl Luedtke, you know that he was quite nervous that last half hour. He was walking around checking things continually. You'll see Karl head toward the side where the lines were that ran to the trip beams. There was one line at each end of the barge. There were air guillotines set up to cut those lines. There's another view of the 16 and the men at work. Made quite a splash, not only in the water, but also with the town of Frankfort. There you see the tub or turntable being erected. In the foreground, you'll see a level that was used to level up the rail circle. From that day to this, we've had trouble with bolts breaking on the rail circle, and part of the reason is that we only have shim plates under the rail instead of a continuous plate. Here you see the rotating frame being hoisted into position. You should be able to notice that there are heaving lines to the load. That's to keep it from keep the load from twisting and turning. Same heaving lines are in use today. I hope. These were all delicate picks for the machinery in use at the time. One of the ironies of this whole project is crane 3 is being used to erect crane 6. It was a few years later, the crane 6 was used to disassemble crane 3. There's your hoist into position. It's got 2 frame 10 hoists on it. Due to the weight of the load, the frame 14 drums were installed individually. At a little later in the video. Old Sultry once told me that the erection of crane 6 was nothing more than a giant jigsaw puzzle. It was quite a feat to erect it all. Took over 32,000 man hours to construct it, and has a replacement value of roughly $8 million. There's a frame 14 hoist being set in position. Next, we see the A-frame being hoisted. Again, a very delicate fit. The couple of men at the top of the A-frame checking to make sure that everything's in order prior to hoisting it over and setting it on the rotating frame. This was a major undertaking for the company, and it proved to bring big dividends in the end. The 16 is the heart and soul of the company. There's a view of the side and the counterweight. Some of the jigsaw pieces that Melts had to put together. There's a base plate being hoisted to go into the counterweight. Counterweight has over 150 tons of grater blades and steel punchings in it. There's a view of the operator's cab. You're just about to see what happens without heaving lines on the load. Something we don't do today. Next, the boom section is being placed on the crane. I was told the boom tip weighs over 13 tons. That maybe explains why we can hit high tension wires and cut the wires instead of folding the boom backwards the way the core dredge, the Swartz did. It made contact with high tension wires and it caused the boom to fold backward over the crane. Here's the port side being hoisted into position. There's a view inside the crane of some of the machinery. View of the back of the Clyde. Here we see the main engine being hoisted into position. This view is of a workboat towing the Derrickboat 16. Here you see the boom up and the machine is fully operational. Some of the first operators on the machine were Dallas Smith, Bill Frary, there's a view of the Purvis getting ready to hook onto it, tow it over to Kewanee, Wisconsin, where it went to work on a power plant job installing a 168-inch multi-plate pipeline intake for the Point Beach nuclear power plant in Two Creeks, Wisconsin. In the foreground, you'll see the future generation of Luedtke. I believe it's Ann, Kurt, Paul, and possibly Chris. Again, the 16 was a major undertaking for the company that provided big dividends in the end. It is the heart and soul of the company. This is a view that many of us see all the time, going from one port to another.
Hi. On July 22nd, 1968, Duke Luedtke, after years of failing health, died at his desk. Karl and Eric took over the management of the company. The company stock was divided between Lucille, Gretchen, Karl, and Eric. In 1971, we obtained a contract for the dredging of the Consumers Power Company pump storage plant at Ludington, Michigan. This was an important project since it moved us into the dredging business. This was job number 409. Prior to the completion of the project, we removed the powerhouse lakeside cofferdam wall, which contained 3,050 steel sheet pilings. The entire inner half of the harbor was then paved with a 2-foot thick layer of riprap to protect the lake bottom, which scoured when the power plant's 6 24-foot diameter penstocks were placed in operation. The project site was located 5 miles south of Ludington and subject to frequent storm interruptions, providing a unique challenge. In 1972, we decided to expand our dredging operations to Lake Erie, which proved to be a profitable decision. In 1973, the company bought out my sister Gretchen Bieneman's stock in the company. The 1970s proved to be a profitable period. In 1972, Mike Bauer, our general superintendent, retired, and Tom Sokovic became our general superintendent. Mike was a brilliant engineer, but the men were afraid to ride with him. The stories of his driving experiences are legendary. October 1981, the tug Duke was towing tug Derrickboat 16, scow number 17 and number 21 to Milwaukee from Frankfort. It was caught in a storm halfway across. Scouts broke loose. Scow number 21 lost. It was washed up on a beach south of Arcadia Breakwater 1.5 days later. This was the storm of 1981, October. There you can see the the dump scow getting broke. And the next picture. As you can see, the Derrickboat 16 was taking on water, but they were able to make it over to Milwaukee all right. The next slide is Luedtke Mine, Sandusky Harbor. It was a splashy way to prove a point, but Karl Luedtke of the Luedtke Engineering Company said he'd do it again, even though he got arrested for it. Luedtke was charged last week with littering in Sandusky, Ohio, after completing a harbor dredging project for the condo development in Sandusky Bay. The development company had not paid Luedtke the remaining $65,000 for an original $3 million dredging project, so Luedtke planted phony water mines in the harbor to make a point and to embarrass the company. Luedtke said on August 6th, he placed about 15 beach balls painted black to look like mines in the channel off the harbor, accompanied by a sign in an aluminum boat that read, "J.B. Wolf has not paid for his dredging. This channel, until further notice, has been mined." It did the trick, said Luedtke, now back in Frankfort. They paid up 2 days later. Meanwhile, police, aided by Ohio watercraft officials, had the boat and sign removed from the water and cleared away as many of the mines as they could. They arrested Luedtke August 7th. He quickly confessed to the police and explained his actions. "I told him it was a common dredging practice to put plastic buoys to mark dredging paths. And he decided to embellish the act a little," he said. Luedtke said he tried court action, but it had not gotten the whole bill paid. Littering charges against Luedtke were dropped the next day during a hearing that morning in Sandusky Municipal Court. He said, "Will he use this method again? Well, we'll play it by ear, though. He seemed to work pretty good." And then he grinned. In the 1980s, the next generations of Luedtke started working for the company. We had Kurt, Karl, Paul, Alan, Eric, and Chris Luedtke working in the business. People would ask for Mr. Luedtke, and I would ask him, "What age and size do you want?" Kurt Luedtke began working for the company in 1984 after graduating from Michigan State Engineering. Paul Luedtke began working for the company in 1986 after graduating from Michigan Tech University Business. Chris Luedtke began working for the company in 1982 and graduating from Olivet Business. And then Alan Luedtke started in 1989 Valparaiso University Business. This is a picture that was in our family home on 1180 Sunset Drive in the living room. The picture is hung in the office entranceway to the Luedtke Engineering Company. You've got cousin Chris, and then Uncle Eric, my brother Paul, my brother Kurt, there's me, and my dad Karl. The 1980s was the most profitable period of the company history, but unfortunately, Karl started to develop heart problems. We started to make family decisions on the future of the company, and mother started gifting her company stock to her grandsons. In the 1990s, the federal government and utilities cut back on the amount of work they were doing. This has resulted in roller coaster years. The family began making plans for the third generation and decided that Karl's sons would take ownership of the company and purchase Eric and Chris's interest in the company. Karl and Eric were as different as two individuals could be, but were always able to talk through their problems and arrive at mutual decisions. Karl's death on December 23rd, 1994, due to heart failure was a blow to all of us. This is a picture on November 1st of 1995. Mayor Catherine Simpson officially proclaimed the improved Rotary Park as the Karl E. Luedtke Rotary Park in honor of the many contributions Luedtke made to the city of Frankfort. This next picture, as far as I know, is the only picture with 4 generations of the Luedtke family. Right here is Grandma Luedtke, and then there's Uncle Eric, that's second generation, and then behind him is Joan Luedtke, second generation. This is my mother Sue, who's second generation, and then there's my brother Paul, third, his wife Arlene, and then my wife Jean. There's me, and then over here is Kurt. He was third generation, and then his wife Kelly, then my sister Ann, and then you've got the 4th generation, that would be Kurt's daughter Jackie. On June 23rd, 1996, Lucille Luedtke died at the age of 94. Although mother was not an active participant in the company, she was a great help in supporting the family plans for the next generation of Luedtkes. In 1996, the ownership of the Luedtke Engineering passed to Kurt, Paul, and Alan. Chris decided to start his own business, the C.E. Luedtke Construction Company. The next picture was a July 1999. Richard Brower from Traverse City produced a film in Frankfort called The Lost Treasure of Sawtooth Island, featuring Seth Bernard and Ernest Borgnine. Past films included McHale's Navy, The Poseidon Adventure, Dirty Dozen. The opening of the film showed the tug Allen, and then later the movie showed the tug Captain George, formerly the tug Kurt. In 1999, Eric Luedtke retired from the company after 42 years. Some of the key employees in the 1990s were Rich Arnold, Ed Carlson, Kevin Hollenbeck, Dick Huff, Gary Kaiser, Jim Holtree, Shannon Jensen, Randy Johnson, John Keeler, Tim Kibbe, Greg Lamerson, Dale Leonard, Don Mills, Vanessa Mills, Vito Malelli, Les Moore, Ken Rohn, Mike Smeltzer, Todd Smeltzer, Jack Smith, Leonard Valentine, Lori Wilcox, Tom Sikovic, and Steve Zachman, and many others who have worked for the Luedtke to help make the company a success. This next picture is in the late 1990s. The company purchased a 12 cubic yard and a 15 cubic yard cable iron bucket from Ray Bergeron, the manufacturer of mechanical clamshell buckets from Trenton, Michigan. This allowed the company to increase the bucket capacity in the maintenance dredging market. And it also helped increase the profitability of the company. Over the next 25 years, from 1997 to 2022, 230 projects were maintenance dredging with the Corps of Engineers or other private companies. 80% of all their projects were maintenance dredging. This was a Luedtke Engineering fleet map that was posted in the office wall, and it pointed out the dredging projects on the 5 Great Lakes: Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, and Ontario. If you start over here to the left, you've got Duluth, Minnesota, and Superior, Wisconsin. If you come all the way over here to the St. Lawrence Seaway, they dredged the harbors of Messina, New York, and all the harbors in between. 8 harbors were dredged during that time in Lake Superior, 40 harbors in Lake Michigan, 16 harbors were dredged in Lake Huron, 25 harbors were dredged in Lake Erie, and 9 harbors in Lake Ontario. Some of the most harbors that were dredged were the Toledo 13 times, Saginaw River 14 times, and Green Bay 10 times. And then there was a location at Gulliver, Michigan that was dredged 17 times. In September of 2002, I left the company after working as a superintendent vice president for 13 years and started a new career in the banking industry. On November 16, 2011, Chris Luedtke died at the age of 52 as a result of a house fire. Chris joined the company in 1982 and worked for 12 years, and then founded the C.E. Luedtke Construction Company in 1994 and completed excavation jobs throughout Benzie County. He was a tireless worker and generously volunteered his time and resources throughout the community, including helping with the building trades program at Frankfort High School. This is a picture with Chris working for the city of Frankfort, building a concrete barrier at the Frankfort Beach turnaround. And in the dozer is my grandson, Sam. Another generation, the fourth, started in 2013 when Aaron Wills, my stepson, a civil engineer graduate from Michigan Tech University, started working for the company as a project manager. Here's a picture of Aaron in a Monarch survey boat traveling down the river. In April 6, 2016, Eric Luedtke died at the age of 82. Uncle Eric lived a life of dedication to his family, community. He was well loved for his quick wit and sense of humor. He was an active community leader and devoted church member. In 2018, after 50 years, Tom Cikovic retired from the company. Tom's son-in-law, Craig Argue, started working for the company in 2006 and took over his duties as general superintendent after Tom retired. On April 20th, 2020, Tom Cikovic died at the age of 70. This is a picture of Tom in the Luedtke office entrance. On May 11, 2020, Kurt Luedtke died of a heart attack at the age of 63. If there ever was a person who could be described as an all-around great guy, it was Kurt Luedtke. He never tired of supporting local businesses across Benzie County as well as local city government in Frankfort, notably as a city councilman in the 1990s. Kurt and Tom were the heart and soul of the company. Later that year, Kurt's daughter Jackie started working for the company, 4th generation. On January 3rd, 2023, Paul Luedtke, president, stated the company is in the process of closing and currently downsizing in the process of selling assets. All equipment assets were sold, including 8 tugboats, 7 derrickboats, 9 dump scows, 2 hydraulic dredges, and land equipment within the next 6 months. The tug Gretchen B was donated to the city of Frankfort. Job number 1,112 was a maintenance dredging in Detroit River. It was closed out in 2023. Over the 92-year period, Luedtke averaged 12 jobs per year. On October 20th, 2024, Paul Luedtke died of a heart attack at the age of 67. Here's a picture of Paul working at the company in the warehouse in Frankfort, or walking into the warehouse. Currently, Kurt's wife Kelly and Paul's wife Arlene have ownership of the company, which includes 12 acres of vacant land on Betsy Bay Boneyard and 10 4th Street office warehouse property with 200 feet of waterfront in Frankfort, which is currently listed for sale. After the company closed in 2023, Aaron Wills took a job with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in the Marine Division overseeing construction projects on the Great Lakes Grand Haven District. I was recently informed by Josh Mills, city manager of Frankfort, whose grandmother Laverna, father Don, brother Chad, and sister-in-law Vanessa all worked for the company, that the Army Corps of Engineers are planning to accept bids in 2026 for the repairs to the Frankfort North Breakwater. Work to be completed in 2026, 2027. Ironically, it will have come full circle. 100 years from the time my grandfather, first generation, arrived in Frankfort to start the career constructing the South Breakwater, and Aaron, fourth generation, will be overseeing the construction project. I'd like to read an article that appeared in the Benzie Record Patriot in 1968. He was a builder. During the 118 years of Frankfort existence, no single individual exerted a greater influence on the growth and progress of the community than the late Duke Luedtke. He was by nature a perfectionist and by a profession a builder. These coupled with an almost inhuman capacity for work was a benefit to the community. It would be impossible to compile a list of all the projects Duke successfully completed. It would also be impossible to total the personal time, money, and effort he poured into these projects. Without Duke's leadership and influence, it's highly unlikely that Frankfort would have the elementary school gym, the post office building, the state garage building now housing Frankfort Manufacturing, the first city marina, the Palver Memorial Hospital, the city sewage and water system, the present city charter, and many other facilities. When he was not in charge of a project which he thought worthy, he was actually supporting it, often with money, men, and equipment. His constant striving for perfection, his unwillingness to settle for less in everything he did occasionally brought him into controversial situations. He always met these head on, showing neither fear nor favor, interested only in knowing that whatever he was doing would be done as perfectly as possible. Whatever Duke did was done because he was sure in his own mind that it was right. It was never done for credit nor personal benefit. The favors he extended to individuals, the money he loaned or gave, and the various kindnesses he offered were invariably accompanied by a request and rather a command for anonymous. He was a man of contrast, a strict discipline, especially with himself. He was abnormally compassionate. Though extremely successful businessman, he spent much more time on details. Though very busy most of his life, he was always willing to take time to listen or help. He served as the first mayor of Frankfort. He was responsible in part for Frankfort changing from a village to a city form of government, president of the school board and Benzie Hospital Association, secretary of Crystal Downs Country Club. He was well known for his local philanthropy, making many substantial donations to various worthy causes, as well as aiding numerous individuals. But whatever else he was, Duke was first and foremost a builder. Because of his ability, energy, and dedication to public service, Frankfort is fortunate that he chose to settle here. He was a tremendous, valuable citizen, a good man whose presence will be missed, but not forgotten. Next picture. That's a picture of Duke at his winter home in Delray Beach, Florida. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. I'd like to thank all the dedicated employees who made this company a success. Thank you. 8 o'clock.
All righty, we'll have time for questions. I just ask that you wait to receive the microphone before you ask your question.
What is the status of dredging of the harbor in Frankfort? Is that continuing or is no longer going to be done?
Probably won't be a lot of dredging in the Frankfort Harbor just because there's not a lot of industry in the harbor. And so the Army Corps of Engineers probably won't spend the money to dredge the harbor. It might have to eventually be paid by private companies, but you know, the Army Corps of Engineers every year goes through their harbor projects and then they decide where to put the money towards which harbors typically are the harbors that have a lot of commercial activity.
Well, I have a story to tell about Joan Luedtke. First, I have a little humor. On the Kentucky Derby, I picked the horse render judgment. So be it. Anyway, years ago when I had a business in this area, I always heard of Luedtke Engineering, but I never met any of the family members. However, about 4 years ago, when I lived in Florida about 24 years, I moved back to Frankfort at Michigan Shores Cooperative, independent living, 55 years of age and older. Well, guess what? Joan Luedtke moved to Michigan Shores about 2 years ago. She's about 88 years old, and apparently she married Eric Luedtke back in 1956. I believe it was in Wisconsin or Milwaukee, but eventually they moved back to Frankfort. And then Joan sold her mansion, which is below the Heffron Hill area, and she moved to Michigan Shores on the 3rd floor, 2 doors down from my apartment. Every day she would show up for coffee hour and happy hour in the evening, and she had a wealth of history, obviously, about Luedtke Engineering, which I never knew about. But eventually, about 3 weeks ago, she had to move down to a assisted living in Kalamazoo, but she's still alive. But she was an historian about the Luedtke Engineering that everybody at Michigan Shores appreciate. Thank you so much.
My name is Rob Jones, and I'm going to be giving the lecture for the Historical Society in August on the Collins Drugstore. And the name Luedtke's come up a few times during my research, and there's one project that, at least to the Collins family, it was very famous, but not mentioned tonight, was the pouring of concrete for the new store to replace the old one. And apparently, Ozzie Nest and Albert McKinnon spent a full day. It was a very, very cold day. I think it was December 1939, dredging a hole there. And then Duke Luedtke came and put the cement foundation on and put a furnace there, came back the next day. And then from 6 o'clock until 10 o'clock in the evening, they poured concrete for the walls with generous nips of spirits, apparently. So the story goes, to get them through the day because it was very cold. And then they put a tarp over the top of it, lit the furnace, and apparently throughout the evening, they had lights there to make a show of it. There was steam that would come out through the light. It looked like some type of haunted house. That was the conversations piece on the Frankfort on the Main Street. But very colorful family, and thank you for your talk. It was great talking.
Just very quickly, I'd like to see anybody that was an employee of Luedtke's stand up. There has to be a.
I believe that there is a model replica of the Clyde at the History Museum that you can go and see.
Any questions on Zoom? All right, well, let's give Alan another round of applause, please.